Welcome back to Too Light, Too Dark. This is episode 24. And today's conversation really lives in that in-between space where we return to again and again. The place where things aren't fully resolved, but something honest is unfolding. My guest today is a choreographer, a director and educator with over 25 years of experience across dance, theatre and creative process. She's a former company member of the Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane Dance Company, the director of her own organisation, and she's taught at universities throughout the country. She's also an award-winning theatre choreographer, an intimacy director, and the author of The Embodied Conductor and The Anatomy of Art, work that invites artists to slow down, disrupt habit, and stay present with uncertainty instead of rushing towards answers. In my research, it's been fascinating to explore how that works. It lives in the tension between light and dark, structure and freedom, knowing and not knowing, rigor and care. So with these words as flowers at introduction, please welcome Alexandra Beller.
Hello.
So I'm going to kick off with an origin question. And so, Alexandra, can you take us back to a moment that you first realized dance and movement could be more than performance, that they could be a way of thinking, feeling, and living?
I think honestly, it was always that for me. I don't think I realized it could be performance until quite a bit later. When I took my first dance class at a summer camp when I was 8 years old, I immediately felt, oh, there's my whole self. Like all of my different parts are suddenly in the room, alive, present, and being witnessed and seen. And I came from a family where I was alone a lot. And had very few witnesses to my life. And so there was this wholeness and realness and presence that came into my being when I danced. And then I was often physically in a room with other people actually watching me be this whole person. And so I feel like it's always been that way for me. It's never really been about the performance. It's always been about the movement. And then when I became a choreographer, I realized all of these things that I'm grappling with as a human being, morality and shame and ecstasy and desire and grief and, all of these life experiences could make their way through metaphor onto a stage. And it was a way of asking other people if life felt the same way to them as it felt to me. You make this dance, you put it on a stage, other people are watching it. And my hope as a creator is that somebody sitting in a dark audience feels seen by watching my work. They see something and they're like, oh, I know that one. Yeah, I didn't think anybody else. And just the way that we can traffic through metaphor, I think allows it sometimes to bypass some of the literality and allow people to feel met at quite a cellular and soulful level. So for me, even performance was always about this idea of being authentic, being visible, having empathy, sharing meaning.
I think I've read I think he's a Buddhist thinker, sort of philosopher. He became quite popular. My mom's a huge fan. Eckhart Tolle, you've probably heard of him, right? Wrote that book, The Power of Now. And as is always the case with me, I read a lot and I tend to agree with some, disagree with other parts. But one thing that kind of jumped out at me when I read his work is he posited that there was like a cellular intelligence in the body, like that is going, like even something simple like, okay, you cut yourself and your body cells kind of get to work and go, right, well, I'm not consciously there saying you better heal up that cut. The body is doing it, and it has to do it in quite a coordinated way. Does that kind of intersect a little bit with what you're talking about?
Absolutely. The body is the most intelligent thing about us. Like our brain is just a fraction of our intelligence. And we don't have metrics or instruments to even start to understand how much the body actually knows. So we put it in these big containers like intuition. But scientifically, neurologically, in your gut, you have 100 million neurons. Neurons are what are in the brain. But the gut has 100 million neurons. So that when people are talking about your gut response, your gut instinct, do it from your gut. What does your gut say? That's not a metaphor. That's real science. And that's called your enteric nervous system. So you've got your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and goes out to all your little nerves, and that's your sensory and your motor neurons. But then you've got these neurons in the gut that actually do make the body move before you've had any kind of conscious connection to it. And then if we think about just the act of breath, breath is the only activity that we take where it's both unconscious and conscious. So, the heart, obviously autonomic. Thankfully, can't just stop it.
Yeah.
Other things are fully conscious, right? So most of the time my arm's not going to bend unless I say to my arm through my, motor cortex, bend, straighten. So I'm making that choice unless it's, a reflex. So for the most part, things are either autonomic, unconscious, or conscious and decided upon. But the breath is autonomic, and yet we can shape it, we can hold it, we can pause it, we can lengthen it, and we can very quickly affect our nervous system, our vagus nerve, our anxiety, our mood, our brain chemicals through breath. So it is this place where we can have actual, like, tangible effect on the body, but the body, mind, spirit, all of it. So yes, I think there's more intelligence and information in the body than in the brain. Obviously, brain's part of the body, but for this purposes, this purpose, we have this physical brain, central nervous system, and then the rest of our body has information. It holds memory. It holds trauma. Yeah, I think we remember things we don't know we remember. The body remembers things that we don't consciously know about. Recovered memory is often from the body, and often it's from like a scent or a song, or you see a certain combination of objects or hear a word, and suddenly a whole series of feelings come into the body. What is that? Oh, that's attached to a memory. But that cycle goes from body back to brain.
You ever had people kind of unlock memories, as you say, that they didn't know they have? Like maybe they were taking one of your dance class, or maybe you were working with them on a show.
Both memories and also just like modalities and feelings and ways of operating that they weren't realizing, or, like super simple example, you'll sometimes be sitting there and be like, oh, I've been clenching my teeth and I just realized it, or, oh, I've been holding my breath, or, oh, my shoulders have been hiked up and I didn't know. Oh, okay, I can do that. And these ways in which when we tune into the body, what's called interoception. So proprioception is our sense of what's outside of us, and interoception is our sense of what's inside of us. And so feeling hungry, feeling the gut churning, feeling how fast your heart is beating, etc. These are all forms of interoception, as is like, oh, my neck is tight or I have a headache is, pretty easy to clock interoception. And then there are much more nuanced things where the longer we spend somatically getting in touch with the body, the more access we have to all of this feeling that's in the body. And I've had people in one-on-one sessions, because I also do this therapeutically, have actual recovered trauma memories or suspicions of, like, I feel like something must have happened when I was pre-verbal because this keeps coming up and it's a lot of feeling. But I've also just had, I work on release and surrender and yielding in the body. And then I also work on like control and alignment and choice and decision in the body. And just this act of working on how much force do you feel like you need to apply when you're trying to control something in the body. It goes directly to like, is that what you do in your life? Like, do you feel like when you control things, it has to have a lot of like force and pressure and, coercion and strength? Or can you control something the way you thread a needle or the way you hold a newborn baby, where you're absolutely using a lot of control, but with tenderness, lightness, maybe flexibility, etc. So sometimes when I'm working with somebody on releasing their control, not holding in, holding up, holding back, holding together, there'll be a flood. And my partner jokes with me when I come home from a workshop, like, oh, how many people cried today? And I'm like, yeah, 3 people cried. And he's like, good job. Good job, because it means like we got to something, and people had a real moment where something happened or unlocked or unloaded.
What's really interesting, Alexandra, is that the words you've used there around wholeness and presence and maybe understanding kind of morality and where you sit in that wheel, the shame, the grief, the desire, the metaphor, breath work, all of these we've covered within the context of recovery journeys and trauma healing and addiction therapies as well. How quickly did you realize that that might be an intersection, how that could work, like both in that realm and in the creative realm as well? Is that something that's been natural to you? Has it been a progression?
I think both. It was natural and it has been a progression. And there's been some real conscious effort on my part towards education. So I do think that I've always been a big feeler. Since I was a kid, I always had a lot of feeling. So I've always had access to like the world through a very feeling and intuiting state. Um, and then I was definitely teaching from that place, and I noticed that I had a lot of access to, when I was young, I thought guessing, and now as I'm older, feeling like feeling into how other people are feeling, a certain kind of like empathic intuition. And the older I get, the farther into menopause I get, the more I get this like witchiness. I'll just come out and and say it, that like I have these like hits about people and things will come up, and I'm not like, oh, I see you in a green dress sitting on a side of the road. It's not about being psychic per se, but when I'm involved in touch in a class, and I can feel feelings in people's bodies, and I feel them in my emotional center from somebody else's body. So that's been a journey. Part of that journey has been like academic and educational, and really studying some trauma therapy and the work of all these great practitioners, Bessel van der Kolk and Philip Levine, and amazing people who are working in trauma, and then coming up against walls in artists and in performers. And in artists, in both of them, like you'll hit a point of resistance or you'll be giving a correction and it's just not going through. And then I start mobilizing around like, what is this thing that's not coming into play for this person? They can't let go of their attention, or they can't find free flow with their voice, or they can't um, give into the momentum of a movement. What is happening? And we start to dig into it. And I realize it's always connected to this other deeper system of emotional, spiritual, social, communal, political, all these other systems that are co-running and co-regulating with our body. So I don't believe that there's any distinction or siloing between the physical, the emotional, spiritual, even intellectual, mental, etc., and social, communal, political, etc. It's all living in the same system, and that system is inside our body. And when one thing changes, like a grain of sand on the beach, everything changes. So this idea of stability, mobility, and when one thing moves, or dynamic alignment, when one thing moves, everything moves, even if it's not visible, has always been part of my progression. But as I've gotten more like technical information, I've been able to make clearer choices around like, well, what do I do when I hit one of those moments? And an artist is like making work that's like not truthful, and is like is a mask. Like their work is a mask. And I'm thinking, you know, what is the way to approach this person that is consensual for them? Because I'm not like going to try to tear down their mask. You don't rip off somebody's mask. You get curious about what's that about. I'm noticing that there's some feels like masking going on. What is happening in there? What is that for you? Do you feel that? I have this fantasy that at some point a dancer will come to me and say, I I feel in my life really small and less than and not enough all the time. It's exhausting. And then but the one thing that consistently gets me this like positive feedback from the world is like that I have this like traditionally beautiful body and I'm really virtuosic in my dancing and my legs get up to my head and I look really good in little short shorts and I really like the attention that I get from people, and it feels like it kind of soothes this ache inside me that I feel like not good enough all the time. And I want to make a solo where people just really admire how beautiful and virtuosic I am. I want somebody to come to me like with that. But what I get is they come to me and they're like, I'm going to make a solo about my father's death or slavery. And then I'm watching it and I'm like, what I really feel in my body is that you want us to admire you. And that's not what you say you're doing. So there's something going on. And the solo about their father or the solo about slavery is a mask.
We do have that in the artistic creative sphere. Both Leon and I have been musicians. I'm still dabble in creative writing. It is something you have to feel all the time, whatever you're performing art. It's really refreshing to hear you just address that head on. I have to say, because vanity, it does come into it always.
Yeah. And then like the thing is, there's nothing wrong with vanity, but let's look at it and let's say, well, let me get into this. Oh, what's this vanity about? Let me try it on and let me be really aware of it. The way we were talking about introception, let me like enter vanity and say, okay, well, what's happening right now? Yeah, what is this? I yeah, I'm feel like I need to prop myself up. Okay, what's underneath that? Yeah, there's a lot of vulnerability and smallness and fear underneath that. Okay, am I willing to enter that? No, not right now. Or yes, or no, not right now, but I'm noting it, and there's no one right. There's no, I have to rip the vanity off so that I can excavate the feelings. We need to be ready, and it needs all of the parts of us have to be consenting in a given moment, right? And sometimes we have one part of us that is this like growth oriented go-getter. I see the system, I see the matrix, I'm gonna break it down, gonna blue pill myself, right? And if some of the other parts that are maybe smaller or more vulnerable or more afraid are not on board with it, it can become just as abusive from me to me as it can be from the world to me. So just the way the world tells me I should have a certain kind of body and a certain amount of money and a certain partner, all those things. And I'm like, oh, that's all bullshit. And I can fight the world and the patriarchy and capitalism. That's, that feels clear. But then when the person who's telling me what I should be is me, it's harder for me to see. And so I need to slow down in those moments and say, hold on, there's a reason why my inner critic is talking to me now, or there's a reason why I self-sabotage that thing. And I'm not just gonna kind of defame myself or slander myself for the self-sabotage. I'm gonna get curious the way I would with another person. And to a friend, I would never say, why the hell do you keep doing this? It's not serving you. What are you doing that for? That's so dumb. You're getting in your own way. I'd be like, what do you think is happening here that you keep choosing these guys who don't really want to be with you? What do you think's underneath that? What do you think it's giving you? How is it serving you? And I'd be really curious, and I wouldn't necessarily go in even with an opinion with a friend. I'd go in with a lot of curiosity. I might eventually share what I see happening, but I wouldn't railroad them. So I try to do the same thing to myself that I would do to a friend or one of my teenage kids and say like, yeah, I'm noticing this pattern. I'm noticing this vanity. What do you think? What do you think that is? How is it serving you? What is that giving you? And slow down.
I think in the realm of this podcast specifically is it's the authenticity that's brought people back. That's what brings you back to yourself fundamentally is authenticity and blatant honesty. Which me and Damien, fair to say, Damien, we've probably been honest to ourselves, sometimes too honest, sometimes scathing, right? But it's necessary.
I think we've tried. I mean, the thing about the subconscious is you can never be aware of it. So I could be thinking, I'm perfectly self-honest, and I might not, and I'd never know.
Yeah.
So just to caveat that, that is a bit of a, I don't want to swear on the podcast, but that is a bit of a minefield you can walk into. I think we've tried to, yeah. I think we tried to be brutally honest with ourselves, and I like to think I can spot when people are not, but I would caveat that quite heavily. It's difficult. It's difficult
And
to pick up on it sometimes, especially
and
when
I'll
people don't realize themselves, as I say,
yeah,
subconsciously, not maybe aware of.
I'll just use my kids as an example. If they're constantly getting punished for a certain behavior or certain thinking, obviously they're going to start to avoid it. And it's the same thing with me. If I have the honest thought and then I yell at myself for the thought, I'm going to be less willing to have the honest thought and acknowledge it. If I can cultivate real acceptance for all my thoughts, my pettiness, my vanity, my shame, all the parts, and say, yeah, that's a part of me. Um, then I think I can get into a little bit more calibration around feeling safe to have the thought or recognize the feeling and be honest with myself. And I totally agree with you. It is still hard because we are letting the subconscious become conscious, which is why I love dance for this, because the body can start to express something and then you're watching it going, what is that? What's happening? Oh, wow. You're improvising and there's just this like tension. So that's something that the body is feeling that I did not even realize I was feeling. Same thing, notice you're clenching your teeth. You're like, oh, what's happening? I'm trying to control something or I'm feeling some anxiety. I wasn't thinking anxiety. And this happened to me just recently when I was like, noticed myself shaming myself for not being able, grown up in the 80s, patriarchy, etc., women's bodies. And I feel like, okay, I'm 53. I should be able to not care at all what my body looks like anymore. I want to let go of this. I want to be done. It's such a waste of my time. And I feel this thought in my head. It got, I'm conditioned by the patriarchy. I don't want to do it anymore. I want to let it go. And I keep trying to do the work to let it go. And it's not letting go. And then I realized I had a lot of judgment about the fact that I'm having trouble letting it go. And I was being really mean to myself about not being able to let it go. And I was talking to somebody and she said, could you just accept that you're conditioned by it and it's living in you and it might live in you forever? Some of these thoughts that you don't agree with, but are in your body, could you live with yourself like that? Could you live with yourself thinking, I want to believe every body is beautiful, but I feel like these bodies are beautiful and these are less beautiful. And I know why I think that. And I don't want to think that. And I don't believe it, but I feel it. And could you just accept that that's a feeling you have? But I don't like that feeling about myself. That's not high level. It's not evolved. It's not feminist. It's not, yeah. Could you accept that? Yeah. Like that's the work I'm trying to do because then I'm more willing to be honest with myself if it doesn't result in self-abuse.
Yeah, it's tricky, those things, because believe it or not, I think maybe not to the same degree as women, but men, I mean, before the geek chic thing came in and kind of let guys like me off the hook a bit, it was all about, you had to be like him, go down to the gym every morning and bench
Yeah.
press and be an alpha male. And I
Yeah.
remember that from growing up in the 90s. And it was like, well, do you know what? I'm just not that kind of guy who's going to go to the gym and bench press,
Yeah.
100+ kilos every morning and start my day off with, crunching the abs. Is that okay? Can I just be an alternative to that? And I think eventually as that decade progressed, there was a bit of a get out, because I think actually maybe women did take control of that. They said, well, actually, we don't all want to go out with someone who's
Right.
buff and ripped.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so there's an agreement there. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to say in London, it's quite good. Like, I mean, people dress how they wish to. People, we get all body types here. But I did live in Lithuania for a couple of years, and there it was really, I think for women, it was really quite severe. But women slimming down almost to the point where I was thinking, well, okay, my opinion for whatever it's worth, I think you were pretty attractive last summer, and now you really
Yeah.
dropped like a stone, and that doesn't look healthy. What's going on there for you? Who's been telling you to do that? Is it your boyfriend? Is it your girlfriends? You know, is it your peer group? And I
But
just
most
thought,
likely it's them, and it's
yeah,
this just, like, constant conditioning that we have, and my my takeaway from just this bit around honesty and radical honesty and how hard it is to feel it is that it's hard to feel it because we also abuse ourselves for having thoughts that we don't like, for, um, I'm like, "Oh, I can feel that I'm being manipulated here, and yet it's working," or I can feel that I've been incepted with something, but it's in there, and I don't know exactly how to get it out. Can I live with it inside me? Can I accept just like that, this imaginary dancer who comes to me with the solo is accepting their vanity as a crutch for not enoughness? Can I accept that as feminist as I am, some of my just feelings about women's bodies are like highly conditioned by the matrix?
being existence, being society, human
The
society.
construct.
You mentioned that you've got kids a certain age, and I have as well. And I think about all the people that you've worked with, artists, students, and it feels like there's a real bravery in you. There's a real courage in you. How do you instill that in the other Alexandra? What's your techniques? How do you radiate that and make it land for people, and then I suppose help them express themselves with the same bravery and presence?
Well, I think this ties right back into what we were just talking about. I think before bravery needs to come acceptance. And so one of my jobs in the room is radical acceptance of wherever you're at and not judging you and trying to cultivate curiosity. Trying to have truly have no agenda or expectations for what happens to you or from you, how you respond, how you react, that I try to separate my identity and my sense of successfulness with you from what you do, say, what happens. Meaning, I may have something I'm working on with a client, and they've expressed that they want to get more easygoing about something. And so I'm working with them on flow and kinetic chains and trying to get things to move through the body more fluidly. And it's not happening. And if I look at it and say, it's not happening, of course I want to say, like, have I said it the right way? Is there another way to say it? Is there another exercise? Of course, I'm going to challenge myself to come up with new ideas. But also I have to say, yeah, okay, that's not happening for them today. That's okay. And if I put in that energy of like, we're trying to make something happen, you're not getting to the place that I want you to get to, then it's just the same thing as this inner critic, sabotaging my own self. I need to practice radical acceptance for my clients. And hopefully that starts to allow them to say, yeah, I get it. I feel it. I'm not able to do it yet. Okay, that's great. That's great. And then I think that acceptance space is a fertile ground for bravery to be born. But I don't ask for bravery. I just ask for realness. And if that realness is like, I'm totally shut down, or I'm bored, or I'm tired, okay, that's you today. That's okay. I don't have any expectations of how you enter the space or what happens in the space. I have expectations for myself about my attentiveness and my responsiveness, but not the effect that I have on another person, because I can't actually affect another person. I can create invitations and they can pick them up or not, and things will happen from those invitations or not. And none of that progression or outcome has any is any reflection of my value, my intelligence, my sensitivity, my talent, right? I'm trying to assess different things for myself in the room. Like, do I feel like I came up with as many different possible ways to enter that as I could? Did I feel like I was really listening? Did I start to wander at all? Those are ways that I assess myself, but not out of the product or the outcome for the client. And so I hope that starts to generate a space in which they start to be real. And I think sometimes we have all these ideas of like springing up or resilience or like getting better, growing. And we neglect to let ourselves get down to the bottom of something where actual resilience lives. So if you think about the physics, if you're on a trampoline and you kind of stop yourself, you're not going to get real spring. If you really surrender to the down and you get to the bottom and let yourself fully give in to what the bottom of this is, it naturally buoys you up again. And I think that our lives are like that. And it doesn't mean that we don't need support systems or sometimes even medication or, therapy, etc. I'm not saying like just go to the bottom of your depression and stay there. But I do think we need to fully feel something in order to heal the thing. And if we're not willing to say, yeah, okay, that's a lot of shame. And I'm going to pendulate in and out of it as I feel ready. And eventually I'm going to be able to get down to the bottom and say, this is what it feels like down here. And I think that from the bottom, and this is my lived experience, but also my witness experience, when you get to the bottom, suddenly this curiosity starts to come about of like, what else could I do? What else is there? I feel a little bit of inspiration, or I feel a breath, and I do here, do this with me. So we're going to breathe together. We're going to take an inhale as long as you want. At the top of the inhale, pause. Don't exhale. I don't call it holding your breath, but just waiting. And you're waiting until your body says, please exhale. And then you follow that. And then at the bottom of the exhale, same thing. You're just holding, waiting. And it's not a tight holding, just at the bottom of the exhale, waiting for true inspiration to come from the body and to actually feel that the body will always eventually reach out and will take inspiration. And we can like 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. Nothing wrong with a good box breathing. But I really like this breathing pattern because we're waiting for the body to make the choice. We're not controlling it. And when our body's out of control, we might need that box breath because we're applying control because the body's in chaos and we need to apply control. But when we're not in chaos, I like this feeling of like being at the bottom of the exhale and just waiting and seeing what happens, what it feels like when the body finds that moment where it says, oh, and it fills itself up. It always does. And I sometimes get a little panic in my body when I'm at the bottom of the exhale and I'm waiting and I'm like, what if I never want to breathe again? What if I never reach out? What if I have no inspiration, no desire for inspiration? And I can feel a little panic sometimes circling in my body when I'm waiting for the inhale. And I try to just sit with that feeling and wait. And then it always comes. It always comes. And sometimes it feels a little more survivally and sometimes it feels a little more porous, but I always take that breath without forcing myself to by sitting at the bottom.
Pick up on something you said about the fall there, and sometimes you have to let the fall. I mean, I've been through several falls in my life, as has Leon. And I have to say, sometimes that fall, you can be falling an awfully long time. I mean, what do you say if you get people come to you with that?
I think I would get curious about what that fear is about, what the impatience is about. And to try to cultivate some resilience around, tolerance around being real. At the same time, I will say one of the reasons why movement as a practice for healing I find the most powerful thing is because you can do things that don't feel like they're like in the dark night of the soul or the pit of despair, and you can affect yourself through the body, making very simple adjustments. Somebody will come in and say, I feel lost. I'm like, great, let's do a walking pattern in which we're being really clear about directions and walking on the grid. Or somebody will say, I feel unmoored. And I'm like, great, let's work on the soles of the feet and the pelvis, having this like really grounded relationship with each other. And then they leave and they're like, oh, I feel better. But nothing in my life has changed. Like I'm still in the middle of my divorce, but somehow I feel more grounded, or I feel like I know where to head. And so there are ways to use the body to not always have to be in the thick of it in order to change something. And I love that about being able to use the body as the driver.
I've had an experience of that, even at the most basic level. Like, if I've gone out for a walk and okay, I've had enough, I'm going to go to the pub. And I don't know if you've ever had this, learn, you come back, well, maybe those few pints didn't actually do me some good, but I think the walk at least did. But then you see, that's the thing, isn't it? Because we don't always or I certainly don't always behave myself and just, okay, I'm going to go for a walk around the block. And that's where I suppose the reptilian brain gets into action. Is, well, you need to give me a reward. You need to give me something on the end of this, a pint or visit a friend or a
Yeah.
date or something. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's the part I have historically, I think it's fair to say, right, is struggle with is, okay, how do I just literally go through the motions? Literally, because I find that maddening just to move for the sake of moving, just to walk. They've written songs about it, walking blues. Those. He wasn't making things up as he went along. Was old Robert Johnson. Walking blues. That's why it's there in black and white since the 1930s, right? And anyone who's been anxious or depressed, I think, can relate to that song. I've got the mean old walking blues. Now we know Johnson was also an alcoholic, so he was probably walking to the next whiskey shack. But he was walking. He was in motion. And do you ever have like back to basics clients where you get people who don't have a history of dance? They're not particularly sporty. Like Leon, you Will was quite sporty at school, I think, fair to say. What do you say to someone who's more like me? And it's like, well, my idea of an exercise, yeah, it might actually be the walk to the local pub, or it might not. Walk around the park, but it's a pretty basic level of physical activity. I mean, do you work with all different?
Oh yeah,
I'm getting
absolutely.
the impression you work with all different body types and ages and what have you.
Absolutely. And people come to me for very different reasons. So obviously I'm always going to be attuning to the reason why you came in. I don't have any value system about a good amount or bad amount of exercise. I'm a fan of movement in whatever way that it comes in. And I also feel like, and of course, this is not true if you're in a real cycle of disease or addiction, self-sabotage, etc. But I'm also a fan of the like, have the piece of chocolate cake sometimes, have the pint sometimes, as long as it's not something that's spiraling you into chaos, because there are other parts inside of us that are like, you never let me do the thing, and I want to do the thing. And I have much more like conscious relationship with my different parts now, so now I can sometimes have an actual conversation and be like, yeah, I have been being really restrictive and like super healthy, and you've been not able to have an ice cream cone for a really long time, and I can feel that you really want one, and I'm going to go get you one, and we're going to enjoy the heck out of it. And yes, I'm going to get a walk to the place, and I'm also going to get you a big old ice cream, and you can have as much of it as you want. And then that kid inside me is like, okay, so I don't need to now sabotage you in some other way by like, not taking my vitamins or not, doing whatever it is that's my self-care. And I do think sometimes it's one of those parts when I'm doing things that are less healthy that are acting out because I'm constantly not letting them have what they want. So like when you drag your toddler to the grocery store and the dry cleaner and the thing, and they're like, I want this and I want that, and they're not listening, and we're just getting these things, just one more thing, and finally they melt down. The thing that hopefully we do as parents is not be like, get up, and, yell at them, but I'm sorry, I have not been listening. You've been asking for stuff all day. I've only just been dragging you around with me all day, and I haven't been hearing you, and I'm sorry. And what is it that let's do what you want. And, the thing that they want is probably not to go on the treadmill and eat kale, and that's okay, you know? And as long as some part of me stays a little bit in that super ego place where I can modulate it and be like, okay, big picture, yes, you can have an ice cream cone, but if you have 3, you're going to feel really yucky later. And can I talk to the little one and say, you can definitely have one? And it's not about restriction, about not having 3. It's not because I don't want you to have 3, but it's because we're all going to feel really icky later. And I don't think any of us want to feel icky. So, then we can have a real conversation.
I was thinking about that metaphor, the trampoline metaphor and the falling and sort of getting to that bottom, and not to take us back into sort of murky waters or darkened clouds, but I've only really felt that a couple of times in my life, and I'll be quite frank about what they times were, is usually in the middle of a really acute psychedelic experience. There's one. Number 2, and I've been at hot yoga, I get to that place and my body's screaming at me like to get out of there. And then 3 is also in acute withdrawal as well. Now they're very, very different places mentally, emotionally, but maybe what ties them all together is the physical aspects, right? It's that, like you say, Damien referred to reptilian. You mentioned that kind of survivalist mode as well. And then I wonder how much that fuels artistic expression. Is that a spark that gives you your next artistic idea? Is that the fuel for your fire the next time you go and express yourself in a dance? I wonder what your thoughts are on that specifically, Alexandra.
Well, I think it certainly can be, but I do resist the myth of the like angsty artist that like we have to be just swimming in pain and struggle to be able to have the inspiration to make something. I think it absolutely can happen that way. And I think creation can be great catharsis, though there are a lot of pitfalls to making work from your trauma. And if we're making art that is meant to really serve as art, meaning it's going out into the world on its own terms, and it is trying to have a relationship with these other people that are usually unknown to you or the piece of art, your audience, and you're trying to have a relationship with them that's a consensual, collaborative, lemniscatic relationship, meaning like it's going both ways equally, like an infinity sign or a Mobius band. If you're trying to have that kind of relationship between your art and your audience, obviously it can't be all about me. So I have to use my craft to transcend my trauma into something that feels like real art. And I have a real sadness inside that art and healing have gotten so bifurcated, that when you say you do healing work inside art, immediately most artists will dismiss you and say, oh, well, like, so therapy, but not like art. And you're like, oh, real art, the best art is going to be therapeutic for the maker,
Could
for
be
the
to some
performers.
degree, right? It
To
should
some
be.
degree, yeah, absolutely. And because I think real art is always going to engage a deep level of authenticity, and being in our authenticity is going to be healing. So I think that this mythology that healing and art don't live in the same room is such a bummer to me. And part of the reason why that mythology gets upheld is that people are doing this like trauma work and calling it art. And I wish that they would just call it what it is, which is like, I want witnesses for my trauma expression. And that's totally fine. You can absolutely want a witness for your trauma expression. But just like the vanity thing, it's hard to say it right? It's hard to say, I want to feel my feelings and I want you to watch me and sit with me while I feel things because I need that support. It's hard to say that. So you're like, I made art. I made this art piece for you to watch. Like, no, you want to express your trauma and you want me to sit with you while you do it. And if you ask me for that directly, I will say yes. But some of these people wouldn't say yes. And so now you're in this like kind of non-consensual relationship with your audience where you're like, I've told you it's about this, but actually it's something else that I'm asking for from you. And I haven't really asked you directly for that thing, but now you're sitting there in a dark theater being expected to do that thing.
Yeah, don't bleed on me, in other words, right?
Well, and they're pissed, right? The audience is mad because you brought me in really under false pretenses. Whereas if, somebody said, I'm trying to like excavate this really deep shame from my childhood, and I created this hour-long process in which I need a bunch of witnesses in the room to help me to hold space while I do it. Would you be willing to be one of those witnesses? Absolutely. Then everyone in the room is like, yeah, go for it. And I'm not expecting that you've created something that's going to change me or shape me or reform a thought for me or be beautiful. Or I'm just like, yeah, I'm here to give you something. But when you go into a piece of art where the
Fair enough.
basic tenet of the container is the artist is making an offering to you, and then you're like, I just feel like you're asking me for something. I don't feel like you're giving me anything as an audience. Now I'm mad. And that's where people go, oh, I hate trauma in art. No, you hate trauma that has not been processed into art, but you can
And it's
absolutely
being passed off as, I don't want to put it so clinically, but the finished product. It's and
right.
it,
And, I'm like, look, go down by the river in your white dress and go to the heaven and go to the earth, all you like. I think it's wonderful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Just let's not call it a performance, right? Let's call it something else. Call it a healing ritual, call it a community circle, whatever. That's great. I do it every day. It's so healing. It's so wonderful. But don't call it art. That's the part about trauma. And then I also feel like it doesn't have to be from trauma, right? Or at least doesn't have to be from my trauma. I do think my lived experience needs to, what I care about needs to be part of what I'm making as an artist. But there's so much happening in the world. There's so many confusing things about looking at, the different isms and the communication and empathy. And so it doesn't have to be autobiographical, autoethnographic work. It can be, you know, social commentary, political commentary, etc. Hopefully, I'm going to have some real agenda behind it and I'm going to have some feeling. I'm going to care about it. But I don't think it has to be from trauma.
you mentioned the political sphere. Now, obviously, you are New York, Brooklyn. If I had to guess, I would say, although who needs labels, right? That would be strongly quote unquote Democrat.
I
Um,
don't come off
I'm
as MAGA to you.
I'm guessing you're quite insulated from a lot of the things that are occurring that we see on our side of the pond as occurring in the United States right now. And
Right.
we have similar, well, I was going to say the word fuckery, but I'm trying to keep it broadcast friendly. Yeah. See, now it's another editing job for you and it's all your fault. But we have similar types of fuckery
Uh-huh.
going on in the UK. I don't know if that's the old Anglo-Saxon alliance or what you want to call it, where one goes, the other ends up following to some degree. Are you grateful for your space more than ever now because it insulates you, or is it a case of no, more than ever, I need to get my voice out there and the voices of the people I work with out there, or are you very much more like, no, it's kind of what I signed on for back in 2001, and yeah, things have come to a head out there, but I'm here in the New York space of the zone doing what I've always done. I mean, which of those? I've kind of shaped the question a little bit, but which
Yeah. And
do you hit
honestly,
the
it's not really either or. I would say I have absolutely curated a space, both like live and my social media space, where I'm like, I do not want to have toxic people talking to me about BS that I don't agree with. Um, I'm lucky enough not to have that in my family, so I do get to curate spaces where I'm like, yeah, we're all feeling the same thing, right? I don't um feel better being in spaces that are more like heterogeneous around, m- people not thinking that LGBTQ people should have equal rights, or not thinking that women should have bodily autonomy, or thinking that one skin color makes you better. I'm not interested, and I don't choose to be in those spaces. That being said, at least in this country right now, nobody feels insulated. Like, we all feel on the hook. We all feel, even in a liberal city like New York, and we've got Mom Donnie and he's amazing, but we all feel absolutely affected by everything. And, we're getting shot on the streets at political protests. So you can be with all your left wing progressive friends and fighting for freedom and taken down. Like, there's no insulation right now. So I am glad that I've curated spaces where I feel safe, and I feel safe-ish, and safe to express opinion, and safe to just be like, we can just make the assumption that all of us are exhausted by the news right now. Nobody's happy about what's going on, right? We can all make the assumption that whatever tragic thing happened yesterday, we're all feeling a little heaviness from it. And I like walking into those spaces because I don't feel like I have to be careful about the way I say, when I go to a university and I'm in like Oklahoma teaching at a university, I have to be more careful about what I say. I don't just walk into the room and be like, yeah, I mean, because like we're in the apocalypse, right? I have to say, like, there's a lot of intense energy out there right now, right? And we're probably all feeling the effects of the intensity. And I'm like, what's the bigger container that might hold somebody who like supports ICE and Trump and systemic white supremacy? And, as long as they're not hurting anybody in my space, I, want there to be space for them to exist. But it's a lot of care and control and modulation for me to make sure that I'm not just, relaxing into an assumption about what's in the room. So I guess both is the answer to your question.
Yeah, it seems there's a lot of self-censorship going on now, like on
Yeah.
both ends of the political spectrum. You have left wingers and right wingers. I'm trying to be impartial here, and they're both complaining it. Well, I can't say this because I'm accused of being racist or transphobe. And then there's people like you saying, well, look, I've got these spaces. I can't just go into and say what I want because then I'm going to catch hell too. And
Mhm.
that is not good for the arts. I mean, when we all journalism for that matter, when
Yeah.
we're all suddenly in a position where it's like, I need to check the postcode before I figure out, or the domain name if it's in the online space, the platform name, before I can mentally review what I am allowed, ideas I am allowed to think and express.
Yeah.
And that is something that is really that I never thought naively, probably, because I'm kind of a 90s guy. I never thought I would come to see that again, where you
Yeah.
literally have to be thinking twice about what you're going to say and where you're going to say it.
Yeah, we got very complacent about democracy, and, it's easy to do, but, it just takes a very quick peek back at history to look at, all of the beginnings of all of the fascist and dictatorial authoritarian structures, and say, yeah, there were first steps, and they didn't just start marching in the street. They started by censoring your freedom of speech and your access to space and your access to being in a community, and you know and then that became the baseline, and from there you've got your boiling frog, your classic boiling frog.
That's a good way to put it. And I think Damien was right when it came to the timeline here. We're approaching up to an hour, and yeah, we've touched all sorts of bases within this conversation. I probably guess we could go for a bit longer for sure, but just to keep it in the realms of decency, if you will, um, I'm going to give you a dessert question, and I think it's really important that Our podcast is always directional. We're always looking to bring people up and inspire and give a little bit of hope, regardless of what all the noise is going on outside. So for artists or listeners trying to cultivate courage or presence or creativity in their own life, what's one practice, insight, or mindset that you would leave them with?
I think from the most granular levels, starting to get in touch with what you really want in a given moment, what your feelings are. That doesn't mean that there's an assumption that you'll get what you want. And I think cultivating intuition, which usually means slowing down. So if there's one thing that I could say, and it's so simple and yet so hard, it's to slow down, to try to sense, feel, and intuit, rather than trying to bulldoze our way through our lives thinking. And that sensing, feeling, and intuiting is the birthplace of creativity. And then noticing the places where you are most creative in your life. And that doesn't have to be like I draw pictures or I do pottery. It can be like I'm really good at problem solving a scheduling issue. I'm really good at figuring out in a room there are a bunch of different students and they have really different needs or agendas or at their different levels. I'm really good at tailoring different exercises or activities or lengths of times to different learning types in the room. Those are versions of creativity. So noticing where we are most creative, feeling that structure inside of us. What are we doing in that moment when we're so effectively being creative? Okay, how can I turn that on in another situation? How can I turn that on in places where I tend to shut down or freeze, go into paralysis? How can I turn on my creativity? Because our original source of creativity is problem solving. So how can I bring that creativity to my life as expression, as problem solving, as adaptability, as mobility and flexibility, so that like when life offers me these obstacles or threats, I can very quickly, creatively problem solve, move out of the way, dodge and weave, and stay centered in the face of a lot of stimulus.
That's really interesting. Sorry, what you said about creativity originates in problem solving, because in a way that kind of ties it back to evolution. Like, you see all the old cave paintings and they go, caveman did this, like whatever, 13,000 years ago. It's like maybe so that's an application of the same skills. It's that same process in your opinion. That's the creativity, problem solving you see in absolute, because you often hear that in the world of business. Are we like creative thinkers? You hear a lot of that in certain areas of New York, right? Probably more Manhattan way. Like we
Right.
like creative thinkers, and it's all about business solutions and making money. And we tend to kind of separate the two. Like, no, there's true, well, we might snobbishly say true creativity in the arts, and then there's all that problems up. But you're kind of bridging that divide, essentially.
What babies are doing when they, your brain is so plastic, you're born, you're trying to figure out the world, you're trying to figure out how your hand grasps. And so you try it, it doesn't work. And then at a certain point, you get the right synaptic pathway and then you're like, oh, that now every time I know how to do it, it builds a groove in your brain. You basically never have to think anymore about how do I clasp and unclasp my hands, because it goes right there to that same synapse. So our original creativity, literally creating our brains, was functional. I need to do something. I want to do something. Most of that functionality was based on survival and bonding. I want to get to milk. I'm going to learn how to crawl so I can get to milk, so I can save myself because I'm going to die. So most of our creativity that happens in that beautifully plastic baby brain is the same set of skills we need now, but we start to get dull and lean into habit. And because that synaptic pathway is there, like, oh, well, that's the way it's always done. But then that's the way you always communicate. And that's the way you always make your bed. And that's the way you always solve a problem. And we stop looking for a new pathway. And so, yes, babies are doing this like building of the brain. But then eventually we're like, right, what's the other possibility? And that's how the baby eventually built that brain, is being like, well, that didn't work. That didn't work. That didn't. Oh, that worked. That's interesting. And things stop working for us.
So, to find that pathway home, uh, I'd like to thank you so much, Alexandra. You've shared your insight, your stories, your wisdom, creativity, courage, and the power of movement. Today's conversation has reminded me that making art and fundamentally making a life always lives in that tension between light and dark, structure and freedom. If there's one takeaway for our listeners today, it's this: lean into uncertainty, trust your instincts, stay present with the messy, beautiful work of creation. I'm so grateful you joined us today, Alexandra. So until next time, keep exploring, keep moving, and keep sitting with the spaces in between, because that's where the magic happens. Namaste. Thank you so much, mate.
Thank you.